What is going on, everybody? I am your host, Graysonauth, and welcome back to Cosmic Complexity. This week, I have promised that we would be talking about Bigfoot, and I hate to say it, I do not have my co-host Trent with me, but today I do have a special guest, full-time electrician, full-time husband, full-time dad, full-time brother-in-law, and alleged Bigfoot witness, Brock Wesley Clark.
Hey, yep, that's me.
Welcome, Wesley, to the show. Earlier today, so me and Wesley are actually co-workers and brother-in-laws.
Yeah, we can't get enough of each other.
We just love each other too much. And while we were working together, he asked me about this specific podcast, and I told him, like, yeah, it's about different things, about what people believe, and religion and whatever. And then I also mentioned that I was going to talk about kind of silly things like flat Earth or aliens or Bigfoot, which he then in turn told me his own Bigfoot story, which completely blew my mind that I didn't know about this encounter. Alleged Bigfoot, though. He doesn't want to.
Yeah.
You don't want to say it was Bigfoot.
I don't know. I'll let the audience decide, because I can only say what I saw. There was no name tag. There was no subtitles. So I'm just kind of describe what I saw, and that's we'll let the audience decide on that one.
Yeah, we'll go into it. I think first off, before we go into this story, because I think it is an amazing story and it's going to take up quite a bit of the conversation, I just want to ask you off the top, do you think that Bigfoot is real?
I do.
Okay.
I do think that Bigfoot is real. Do I know what Bigfoot is? Absolutely not. I have no idea what Bigfoot is, but I do think whatever it is, it's real.
Do you think that if you hadn't witnessed allegedly a Bigfoot, that you would still believe in Bigfoot? Do you think, like, without the backup, that you would still believe that that is an actual thing that could happen?
So one of the things that I think it's important in these kind of conversations is like, okay, what would I think if I didn't know something? It's really hard for me to put myself in a headspace like that. I've had, and I'm sure we'll save this for another show, I've had different, you might call paranormal or supernatural experiences scattered throughout my life. It certainly hasn't been a constant thing. But when you have certain experiences that you kind of run through whatever kind of reason and try to attribute it to mundane things, you try to explain things rationally, and you come out on the other side and you say, I still can't account for X, Y, Z, then that kind of puts you in a space where you're like, you know what, I don't know everything about the world and how it works. So you end up with a certain amount of, I hesitate to say open mind, because I don't know if I would describe myself as open mind so much as I'm just, I'm ready to admit that I don't know everything. But at the same time, I don't just let things just fly into my mind. Like I like to think there's a good defense being played, but
yeah, you need a little bit of evidence of it, even if it's not something you've seen.
Yeah, and I did, before the show started, I wanted to pull this particular piece of scripture up. I am a Christian, unashamedly, and I think that it's a good place to start whenever I think about these kind of things. This is where I start. Is Deuteronomy 29:29. The secret things belong to the Lord our God, but the things that are revealed belong to us and to our children forever, that we may do all the words of this law. And so, in other words, there's things that we get to know in this world, and there's just things we don't get to know.
Right.
And so far, I would out of given those two categories, I would say that Bigfoot for me falls into the I don't know category.
I gotcha.
As far as what Bigfoot is, how Bigfoot operates, how many big feet are there? There's 2 big feet at the end of my legs, but that's the only ones I can account for. But dad jokes. I am a full-time dad.
Thank you.
Yeah, so that's kind of where I'm coming from. But I do have my theories, and I'm I love hearing what other people have to say on this particular subject because some theories make more sense than others, and the fun part is hey, maybe I'm right, maybe you're right, maybe we're both wrong,
right?
But there's it's not an objective enough thing, and despite some people making their entire life about it, it's not a very important thing. So we can leave things up in the air and sleep at night.
So when you look at cryptics as a Christian, and you pull out the verse in Deuteronomy, which is a great verse, and some people I think would look at that verse and kind of say, well, that's kind of a cop out where you could just put anything that we don't know as well. That's the Lord's knowledge that needs to know. Say Bigfoot being a, like, we'll probably get into this later, but an interdimensional demon or creature that travels back and forth from our universe. That kind of steps away from God in a sense of, sure, we could say God is an interdimensional being as well, but also some people would argue that that is against what God is and against what Christians believe. Have you ever found that as a difficult thing to navigate, like where you kind of just slap that Band-Aid over it of?
So I totally see where you're coming from. It's like where it does seem kind of like a cop out if you're just kind of throwing it in a bucket, leaving it in that bucket. I don't think that it necessarily has to stay in that bucket of, hey, we don't get to know, because part of it not knowing is this just one of those things we don't know yet? I think for a long time how to take a heart out of one person and install it in another person's chest, and that person survive, that used to be knowledge that wasn't for us. We just didn't know it, you know? And so we do know how to do that now. Maybe someday we'll know a lot more about Bigfoot, Sasquatch. I prefer the term Sasquatch. I don't know. It seems less silly.
It's more scientific.
Yes, Homo Sasquatchus. Or Gigantopithecus or whatever.
He's got a lot of terms.
He's got a lot of terms, and I can totally see that. As far as interdimensional beings and stuff like that go, as a Christian, I don't think that that's outside the realm of what is allowed for in Scripture. I can it by name, right? There's no Sasquatch named in the Scriptures, right? There's, that to my knowledge. Weird verse, but there might be an obscure translation out there, but
it's one of the Psalms is about Bigfoot.
Yes. Your love for us are as big as His feet, oh Lord. But no, what does the Scripture show us? Well, we see beings that are not human. They're creatures, so they're created, right? That's what creature means. They're created beings in the Scriptures that are not human, but they're sentient. And we call those angels. And every time, we've all seen the meme, I think by now, the biblically accurate angel.
Right.
There's a good reason that every time an angel shows up, the first thing it says is, be not afraid. Don't freak out, okay?
For those who don't know what a biblically accurate angel is, how would you describe it? What would you say?
Well, I think that's the difficult thing about, I think that what the authors of the Scriptures were writing down are things that they saw. And what they saw were really hard to put into terms. And so the cursory Google search would show some type of orb with eyes and wings and halos and just kind of swirling around. And it's really hard, maybe even, tentacles of radiant light,
I think there was one where they were described with like multiple faces, like the face of a lion, the face of a man.
Right. And I think the point is that those descriptions are the best descriptions that they had. Like if you're a fan of Lovecraftian literature, so H.P. Lovecraft, I like to read that because I think that he does a really good job of describing things that are too. It breaks like reality to look at these horrible things in his books, whenever he describes them, he just a lot of times he'll just be like this undescribable horror, you know, and that's the best way he can describe it. And you know, he might give physical descriptions where, you know, he says Cthulhu is, you know, the head of an octopus, the body of an ape, the wings of a dragon. You know, it kind of is almost mirroring the way that the authors of the scriptures were describing angelic beings, but he's describing a terrible cosmic horror from outer space or from beyond this world that that is you might say through my lens something almost demonic. Right. And you know, I'm kind of the traditional opinion that demons would be fallen angels, and so rolling with that, I mean, if an angel shows up and is trying not to scare you, imagine the angel showing up and not really caring about whether or not you're scared, or maybe even trying to scare you. Yeah. We see that countless, I'm sure you can put a number on it. There are many examples in the scriptures where angels are taking different forms. So we see at the resurrection of Jesus, or right after Jesus resurrects from the dead in the empty tomb. It's empty of Jesus, but I don't know if you remember, there was an angel in there. Yeah. And in this particular case, the angel was in the form or in the shape of a human, and letting them know that Jesus wasn't there, and, you know, go back and tell everybody. And so we have Old Testament examples of that as well. Right. When God took the form of a man, he had two angels with him, and they met and ate dinner with Abraham right before they went to Sodom and Gomorrah. And these angels in human form, the men started gathering outside of Lot's house, and they said, "Give us these pretty men, so that way we can have our way with them." And so, I don't know, it sounds pretty physical to me. Right. But, you know, assuming that's what, quote unquote, good angels can do, can bad angels, fallen angels, demons do the same thing? That's just something to consider, I think, going into this story.
Well, especially like, and I want to do more episodes on cryptics and different types of cryptids. And, you know, I think the idea of angels and demons and shape-shifting and being able to form into these entities is a very interesting one. I definitely want to get into that later down the road, but for now we'll focus on Bigfoot. But it's really interesting. The reason I ask is because a lot of people who have faith kind of don't address it or just ignore it, or, you know, just say like that's false and that's fake. And I would argue that there's a lot that lines up with the Bible that shows a very clear line that these could just be demons and we could just be witnessing those kind of creatures. But
right. It's really hard when people encounter these things to dismiss. Sometimes there is so much emotion and fear that stays with people for the rest of their lives. And there's no indication that they are otherwise not sound of mind. And so I think that it's really important then to ask the question, well, what kind of traumatic experience did this person have that this would stick with them for the rest of their lives? And I think that as far as people in the church go, saying, that's not real, you're really shutting down their experience, and possibly preventing them from getting the kind of care and support that they need when you when you put it into a category of that's not in the Bible. Yeah. And there's lots of stuff that's not in the Bible that you talk about. And I don't, you know, I mean, that that just because it's not explicitly a category in the Bible, I don't think that should disqualify it from, at the very least, having some room in conversation like we have right now.
Right.
I think it's the concept of using your theological imagination. I know that can sound, the term itself sounds
slippery
really bad.
slope there.
Yeah, it's like, no, I don't mean coming up with your own ideas about,
God
I
and
got
Trinity.
it's like I just came up with this totally new thing. I don't mean that. I mean, within your theological framework, there ought to be some room to use those things that you do understand to try then to turn that around, face it out, and try to shine light on the things that you don't understand. I can't really think of a better way to put it than that, is to use what we know, the things that are clear, to help us try to understand the things that aren't so clear.
Yeah, I think that's great. With that, I think we have enough backstory to really kind of know what you're thinking, at least now. If I heard the story right, this happened several years ago, right?
Yes. So there's actually more than one story, and I didn't get to tell you my second story.
That's beautiful. That means I get to hear new stories.
There's more. Yes.
Let's hope it's not BS.
It's if it is BS, I don't know. I don't know it's BS if it is.
I'll call you out on it if it is.
Right.
So how many years ago was this first story?
I think actually I got to thinking about it when we were driving over here. I think that it was 20 years ago this year, actually.
Oh, wow.
So
coming up on the anniversary.
Coming up on the
Bigfoot
anniversary.
That's great. So over 20 years, you've been kind of sitting on this witness and this seeing something, a creature of some sorts, and
I guess the best place to start would just be the start of the story.
Okay.
So 20 years ago, I was in 4th grade, and we had just built a house, and out in the middle of nowhere. We were, I think at least 7 miles from the nearest town, and we were in the Flint Hills part of Kansas. So it's where things stop being so flat, and they start having hills and trees and whatnot and forests. And we had just built a house there, and to try to help you visualize it, we had built the house on a hill, and the back of the house was facing the slope of the hill, so that when you were in the basement, they had dug out the side of the hill, so that way you could leave through doors of the basement. You could walk out of the basement through double doors. And there were some windows down there, and the reason they did that is because of fire code. Whenever you build a house and you want to have a room down there, you got to have more than one way to get out for obvious reasons. And so we had these big French doors, and there was a living room downstairs. And my older brother and I were just kind of hanging out watching TV. I can't remember if it was playing a video game or if it was watching TV, but we were fighting over the remote either way. And I had my back to these double doors. At this point, it was night. I had my back to the double doors. We had the glow of the can lights above us, so it was pretty bright downstairs.
What time would you say this was? Was it like later in the night, kind of dawn?
I couldn't really put my finger on it, but it was winter, and so things got dark earlier, and especially farther up north you go, the farther from the equator, the sooner it gets dark.
Right. But
it probably could have been around anywhere from like 6 to 7:30, somewhere in there.
Okay.
My dad and my grandpa were outside working. And they had, it was cold enough that they had their bibs on, Carhartts, all of that stuff. And they were working on like a fence or something. I can't remember. But I remember seeing them out the window when there was light.
Yeah.
So we were just kind of playing. It got dark, and I had my back to the double doors. My brother was facing the double doors, and we were bickering over something. And one thing about my older brother is that he was very it was easy to tell when he was afraid because his ears turned bright red whenever he was afraid of something. And usually that was because he heard on forecasts that there was a tornado or a thunderstorm. Those things made him pretty afraid because living in Kansas in Tornado Alley, we didn't really, you couldn't throw a stick without hitting something that had been affected by tornadoes.
Yeah.
Funny enough, probably 5 or 10 years later, our small town would be completely wiped out by a tornado.
That's crazy.
So, just to give you an idea, that happens.
Yeah, y'all were kind of right smack dab in the middle of Tornado Alley, right?
We could watch tornadoes from our back porch. In fact, I have some videos from the back porch. I can show you where the tail comes down from the sky.
That's crazy. But
it's far enough away. It sounds like a train.
So you would regularly see him fearful with those red ears and terrified.
Yeah. Like anytime the forecast mentioned it, the sky got kind of green. That.
So it was a pretty clear indication.
Yeah, it was his tail. Yeah,
it was his tail.
It was his tail, and I noticed that his ears were turning red, and he had just kind of stopped talking to me, and he was staring out the back set of windows, out the double doors, because they were French doors. They had full length windows that you could see right through. And I just kind of turn around and follow his gaze, and I see, crouching down to look into the window of the store, a gnarly maw agape, fogging up the window, just looking at us, a great hairy man, maybe an ape is what it almost looked like. I didn't get the best look of the face because this thing was so tall. I could really only see its mouth more than anything, being pressed up to the glass. Most of its head was still obscured by the top of the window.
Yeah. So did you get to see its eyes or its nose? Or?
I didn't see its eyes. I knew its eyes were there though, but the glare from the light on the inside, because you got light inside, dark outside. Really, you had the closer to the glass you could see, the more clear things were.
Right.
I could see dark circles where the eyes were, but I couldn't actually make out the details of the eyes.
Yeah.
I was only probably 10 feet away though.
Which is terrifying.
But yeah, it was terrifying. And what I was focusing on was this mouth that was just, just to try to cut the tension a little bit. Like Patrick, when his mouth is just gaping open, and he's just like stupidly looking at things. That's kind of what it looked like, only with a bunch of like gnarly teeth in it. And it was just dumbly looking at us with its mouth hanging open, whatever it was. And no sooner, it felt like we were staring it down for a little bit. Yeah. That probably only lasted a few seconds before it turned away, it walked away. We looked at each other, and I'm thinking in my head, okay, either I have something to be afraid about, or this is like my dad or my grandpa in some type of very like movie level special effects costume.
Yeah, and like Patrick with the monkey suit on.
Yeah, exactly. Like even better than that. And it was just to give you more details. It was brown. It was a darker brown than like the bibs and the Carhartts they were wearing.
Yeah.
But like, you know, there were a lot of thoughts going through my head, and one of them was, if I shouldn't be afraid, it's because this is my grandpa, or it's because this is my dad. And it stepped away and walked away, and we ran upstairs. And, you know, I was thinking, I gotta look out the window upstairs to see whoever it is dressed up, you know.
Yeah.
And like I said, we're pretty far outside of town. You've been to that property yourself.
Yeah, it's out in the middle of nowhere.
Yeah. And I get upstairs. My brother and I get upstairs, and my dad and my grandpa have already changed and are sitting at the table chatting with my family. So whatever it was not my grandpa and it was not my dad, unless they can freeze time. But I don't want to go there because I don't think they can do that.
Yeah, I've met your parents and I've met your grandfather too. I don't think either of them could time travel.
No.
And I also would like to point out, like, I've been down to that property. There's no chance of it being like some random person dressed up in a costume. There's no reason for it, especially, I mean, it's in the middle of Kansas. Like, it's in the middle of nowhere.
It's cold and it's dark, and why would they be out there? Yeah.
And, I mean, there's just no reason for it. It was a pretty small town, too. Like, population of, how many would you say, like, 10,000, or maybe it was
I couldn't tell you now, but suffice it to say that if someone was it's the kind of place where if someone's just walking onto your property, you might go out to meet them, but you're going to meet them with their gun, with a gun, because you have there's really no reason. There's no such thing as foot traffic through this property. It's 175 acres.
Yeah.
So it's like, it's just not, like you said, there's just no reason.
And it was a heavily, there's quite a bit of like trees and grass and hills. I mean, it's an ideal spot for a Sasquatch to live.
Something could hide there.
It's definitely, you know, when I was there, if you'd have told me this story, I wouldn't be able to sleep because I was terrified of Bigfoot as a little kid. So this would have messed me up. Especially like you telling me that, I was like, is this the same property that I've been to? Because that's terrifying that I was on the same turf. I will say, I think one of the bigger questions that, like, did you sense an energy from the Sasquatch when he was staring at you? Was there curiosity? Was there like a want for you? Did you feel like any sense of danger, or was it more so just kind of staring at you dumbly?
So I left out a little part of the story because I don't remember if this part is true or not. I don't know if this particular part, I seem to remember that it was knocking on the glass. And I don't know if it was trying to get our attention. But I don't know if it was knocking on the glass or if that was just some other sound in the house. So I didn't want to really include it in the story. But either way, it got our attention, whether it was trying to or not. We saw it. And I don't know if I felt fear at the time, apart from like, what? Like, I'm really confused. Right. And the strange thing is, you know, we talked to our parents and we asked them about it, and they you know, right after we got up to the top of the stairs, and they were just kind of like, I don't know what you're talking about. Wash your hands, get ready for dinner, kind of thing. And so we didn't really. The strangest thing is, we didn't talk about it ever after that. We didn't think about it ever after that until like about a year and a half, 2 years ago. I was at work one day and I was listening to some podcast, believe it or not. And I was just like, oh my gosh, did I see Bigfoot when I was little?
Slowly realizing
like it wasn't like part of my, you know, it wasn't my TikTok personality. It's like, I saw Bigfoot.
Right.
You know, it wasn't anything like that. It was just kind of like, it was like a realization. It's like, was that what that was? Oh my gosh. Like, And so I actually called up my older brother, and I was like, "Hey, dude. So back when we first built that house in Kansas, as neither of us live in Kansas anymore. Back when we built that house, remember one night, and it was like wintertime, and I kind of just set up the story. Didn't say anything. I just kind of set up the story.
Didn't
and
lead him on or anything.
I didn't lead him on. I didn't say, "Hey, I want to ask you a Bigfoot thing." I didn't ask nothing like that. I just called him out of the blue. It was weird because it was like up until it popped back into my head, didn't even think about it. But then when it came back into my head, I was kind of freaking out.
Right.
Like that's when it started for me. I was like, "Oh my gosh," And I kind of set up the story. I said, and my back was to the window, and you might have saw something. And as I was trying to finish that sentence, I was like, and he's like, "We saw Bigfoot." And I was like,
so he already knew. He
knew what I was talking about. And I was like, okay. I was both relieved and more terrified at the same time because I was like, oh my gosh, like, what does this mean? You know? And I called my dad. First I called my younger brother. And he and I actually had another experience in that same wood that he brought up when I called him.
So he already had set memories and like he was fully knowing like, okay, I've seen this creature before. And so when you called him and you brought it up, he was like, oh yeah, and this happened, this.
Yeah, so first I called my older brother. He confirmed the story that I just told without me telling it. He told me it was a Bigfoot story, in other words.
Okay.
Called my younger brother because I was freaking out. And I was like, dude, did you know this happened? and he was like, yeah. And he reminded me of a story that I never connected in my head. But suppose that they are connected. I'll tell you this story.
Okay.
So this would have been 4 or 5 years later. I might have been in 8th grade. I might have been in 9th grade. It was during the summer.
Okay.
And I had a friend over, and my younger brother had a friend over. And we would always find things to hit each other with. And that took the form of foam weapons. And there's a brand name of foam weapons called Mashunga, but we figured out how to make them ourselves for cheap. And it's basically a PVC pipe, like a 1/2-inch PVC pipe inside a pool noodle.
Okay.
With a sock over it.
Nice. So
you could hit each other with it.
Some LARPing stuff going on here.
We weren't role playing. We were just hurting each other.
Right.
So there was no I wasn't pretending to be like another person or anything like that. It was
typical Kansas children.
Just out in the woods beating the crap out of each other.
Beautiful.
And as people do. Well, we developed this game where it was kind of a reverse hide and seek, where one person would hide, and the other 3 would try to find that person.
Sounds like a perfect setup. Great.
Yeah, yeah. And the idea was that you were trying, like the three people searching were trying to find that person and hit him with your foam weapon, thus killing him. And we called that person that you were trying to find the wolf. Find the wolf, kill the wolf. But the wolf could at any point sneak up on you and kill you. If he hit you with your... I had to go by the honor system, obviously.
Right.
If he hit you before you hit him, you were dead. You were out of the game. And so you were trying to covertly kill all 3 of them before they could find you and kill you.
Okay, I see the point of it. It's a fun game.
It was really fun. I would probably still play it now if I weren't so terrified. But we would play up next to the house and the buildings that were well lit and whatnot, and on the big giant wraparound porch at my grandparents' house, and it got kind of old because we could see each other very easily. There weren't enough shadows to hide in. So I got this idea. I was like, well, let's go down to the woods And at that time, I was really good at being the wolf. Like I said, we had to make our own weapons, and so I made my own throwing knives out of foam and metal washers that I stuffed. And I stuffed the metal washers inside them, duct taped around it so they had enough weight, and I could throw it. You know,
Nice.
it was an unfair advantage because
Yeah,
I was the only one with range weaponry, but it was fun. But anyway, I was like, let's go down to the woods. I'll hide there, and then you guys come and find me in the woods. It was probably 10 o'clock at night at this point.
Oh. Oh no.
There was a moonlight.
Okay, that's
right.
good.
And
was it a full moon? Was it like just enough?
It was probably a waning moon.
Okay.
So there was a good portion of its face revealed, but for anybody who has not spent time outside of the city, when you're far enough away from civilization, the night sky is actually very clear.
Yeah,
very clear. It's very bright. You can walk out in the field, people will see you for miles just because your silhouette is against the horizon.
Yeah.
It's almost more like a blue outside.
Mm-hmm.
Well, when you are in the woods, you have the canopy of the trees, and that is pitch black.
Right.
That is pitch black.
Fantastic.
I walked into the tree line down by the shooting range, which is the same set of woods that we're talking about. Same portion. This is the same set of woods that was behind the house that we built.
Same location.
Same part of the property, all of that. And I walked in, and I could not see my hand in front of my face. If I turned around, this is how I could navigate. If I turned around, I could see the silhouettes of the trees that I had passed. But I had to use my foam sword to kind of hit in front of me to walk in. And I could see, facing out, the moonlight hitting the field. So like I could see through the clearing and kind of use that as my way of navigating. And I just kind of, I don't know what I was thinking, because I heard what I thought was my brother there in the woods. I'm like, oh my gosh, he's already out here.
Oh no.
And I'm laughing because I'm anxious. I heard him kind of take a couple slow, crunchy steps on because there's a lot of debris in the forest floor. I heard it, and I heard him post up against the tree. I was like, this idiot. And I walked up even more stealthily, and I was on the other side of this tree. Mm-hmm. And it was a good, decent sized trunk. And
you're on the same tree
as my brother. And I kind of lean up against the tree, and I think to myself, as soon as he stands up, I'm going to hit him so hard with this foam weapon. And I'm sitting there. And you know how in the dark, like when it's dark in your room and your eyes are closed, and let's say your sibling walks in, you can kind of feel them there.
Yeah, you can feel the
air pressure changes, something, right? You can feel it. Well, I could tell that my brother was crouching right there. Mm-hmm. I was like, this idiot. And it felt probably a lot longer than it was, but maybe like 5 minutes. Mm-hmm. Maybe even 10 minutes.
You're just waiting patiently.
I'm just waiting. I'm like, and at some point, I'm just kind of like, should I just hit him? Like,
yeah.
like, is he even going to go looking for me, or is he waiting for me to walk by? You know, and at some point in my head, I'm like, well, I've already waited this long, right? The sunk cost fallacy. And I was like, I've already waited this long, so I'll just wait. Otherwise, I waited for nothing, right?
Yeah.
And about that time, I hear some calling out in the clearing. So I could see a road, a little gravel road that ran through the property, a private road that went from the houses down through the woods and to the shooting range. I could see that gravel road, and I saw some flashlights. I was like, what? And I was like, I guess the other guys gave up, and they're calling my name. I'm like, well, then what's the like? Why did I bother coming out here?
Yeah.
If they're just gonna start calling my name and it kind of ruined the game for me. I was kind of like upset.
Defeats the purpose. Man,
right.
The game's over.
And there I saw my friend, my brother's friend, and my brother.
Oh.
Calling my name.
Oh God.
And I look out there, and my brain is just making dial-up noises.
Trying to process.
And it was going burr, and whoever was there stands up and starts walking away. But I'm more concerned with like, I can't, first off, I can't see that. I can see my brother and my friends. And so I'm just kind of, even though I looked, I couldn't see anything. And so I looked back to my brother and my friends, and they shine their light towards the shooting range, and they said, "Oh, there he is!" And they start walking towards the shooting range, calling my name, and I'm already coming out of the forest, and I come up behind them, and I scared the crap out of them.
Yeah,
because they saw someone, a upright bipedal person,
just walking and
running.
Oh.
Out of the forest, away from them, and towards the shooting range.
Huh.
But it wasn't me. And
so
they just saw a silhouette.
Out of the same patch
out of the same patch of woods, probably 30 feet in front of where I popped out.
That's crazy.
And that wasn't me.
Yeah. Did you see the creature running? Did you see?
I never saw. All I saw, the only thing I did, the only sense that I had that it was there was sound.
Mm-hmm.
And then, of course, whatever kind of like I can tell. I don't know if it's my ears picking up on the barometric pressure or
you could
whatever.
feel the energy of that creature.
I could, and I thought that it was my brother crouching down next to the tree.
And you said it took a couple of steps and then crouched behind the tree.
Yeah.
Do you remember feeling it standing up? Like, remember thinking like this thing is standing up right now and now it's crouched down, or was it always lower?
Well, I didn't get a sense that it was standing up until I assumed my brother and friends spooked it.
Mm.
So, I was no longer, because the whole time my body was facing the direction of the tree.
Yeah.
That I was camping at, right? Ready to spawn kill my brother,
Yeah.
And it just never happened. So as soon as I turned away, and I wonder if it could see me looking that direction, and I don't know.
Yeah.
That there's just a lot of things I don't know. What I've told you is what I know.
Right.
I don't want to speculate too much other than something was there. It was crouching down. I didn't quite realize it was crouching down until it stood up and walked away. But by that time, I was also trying to keep my attention on I was like trying to figure out
what was going on.
I couldn't figure out what it broke my brain for a second.
So how would your brother that you talked to, how did he describe the creature? Did he just describe it as running away?
Tall guy running away.
Tall guy.
So it was dark enough that, like I said, even though the moon was out, you could really only see a silhouette when it was far enough away. And he said it was booking it super fast. Whatever it was, whoever it was,
just sprinting and
and it was but it freaked him out.
So fair. I mean,
and
especially if you appeared behind them, like that's.
And I just kind of, he didn't tell me about seeing someone run to the shooting range.
Mm-hmm.
He didn't tell me about that until
when you called him.
When I called him this past year. All I knew is, maybe I was standing next to an animal, you know, and
which is still equally terrifying. Like standing next to an animal, you don't know what it is.
It is scary, but I didn't think about it because I didn't have the other part. I didn't have his perspective of the story.
Right.
I only had mine, and I was like, and then at that point, I was just kind of like, come on, guys. I thought we were going to play this game. They're like, no, we were just looking for it because we're done, and yeah. That was it. That's the end of that story.
That's crazy.
Yeah.
And which, the people that we're not naming or bringing up on the podcast, the reason we don't have them is because they didn't want to share it or they didn't feel like it'd be beneficial for them, which is fair.
Yeah.
Like we're not just copying out. Like these are people that we're never going to bring up or mention. Like these are actual people. I know their names. I know them personally.
Yeah, you've met them.
I've met them.
Yep.
And I do believe that their accounts are true. It's just like that there are several reasons why they wouldn't want to be on a podcast talking about it.
Yeah.
And a lot of it is like the stigma of you're crazy for believing this, which is fair. And I think there are some witnesses and, stories about Bigfoot that are like, yeah, that's stupid. Like that's not true. That's false. And
yeah, some people are trolls. I get that.
And especially now it's so like monopolized and like it's such a huge trend. It's big for a lot of people, pun intended. Like that, there's just a lot of different things that Bigfoot is just a huge idea in marketing and tattoos and stickers and books and TV shows on History Channel. Like it's a huge thing, and it was pretty popular in the early 2000s, 2010s. I would say. Like I remember when I was growing up, it was pretty big.
A lot of Bigfoot hunting shows.
Oh yeah.
Which is kind of silly, in my opinion.
Yeah. But I mean, I think your story in particular sticks out to me the most because it seems more realistic and genuine. Like it doesn't feel like everything was set up for this to be perfectly happening. Like, and there's a lot of details to them that, for me, I'm like, yeah, this is an actual account. Like, it's hard to say if it was Bigfoot or not, but when you look at the description, location, what else could it be? Like, I mean, you mentioned to me earlier today that you looked on what was the website that you looked up for?
I think it's called Bufon. So yeah, last year when I started realizing maybe what I might have saw, I definitely saw, but I didn't know what it was. Yeah, I still don't know what it was. So I just want to be clear. I'm not saying that it is 100% Sasquatch. But it sure does sound like it, right? And so I looked up. There's I think it's called Bufon. It's an acronym. It's basically where it's supposedly an independent website where people can submit reports of their encounters and sightings with Bigfoot, and that's what the B in Bufon stands for. I know that. No matter where you are in the world, specifically though in the United States, and if you're not in a particular town, then you can do it by county.
Mm-hmm.
And I did find, and you got to remember, most people don't even know about this website, right? Yeah. And if somebody had seen Sasquatch, they're probably not going to want to tell a lot of people about it, let alone put it on a website.
Yeah.
So I was very surprised to see that this particular county did have a sighting that was recorded on Bufon. It was not mine. It was not anybody that I knew. And given the location described, it wasn't my part of the county.
Yeah.
But it was really interesting. I was like, okay, so I'm not alone. My brothers aren't alone. And I don't know if you want me to tell this story too. It would turn out that my own father had his own experience.
Yeah.
So after we had, I talked to my brothers, I decided with my younger brother after hearing all that. And he said that he had some more experiences of his own that I won't get into on this podcast, but suffice it to say that he spent a lot of time in the woods with his friends, and they heard some strange things. But I was on the phone with my little brother. I three-way called my dad in, and I was like, okay.
So he's on the same phone call.
And on the same phone call, I was like, I for my own personal well-being, I need to make sure that we're all on the same page here, because this is strange.
Yeah.
And so I called my dad, told him everything that I just said, all the stories. My little brother told his stories. I told him how my older brother confirmed my story, all of that. And my dad got kind of quiet. And I was like, so, yeah. He said, well, I guess you guys are old enough that I can tell you my story now.
Oh.
And I was like,
that's such a scary thing.
Yeah. And then, no matter what the story is, I really don't like how he started that story. Right. But anyway, and it's funny because at that point, I think we were all out of the house by the time this particular story happened. I think it was like 2018, 2019.
Okay, so fairly recent.
Yeah. By this time, I was actually married and with children. So, but he was out on the property, in the woods, in his deer stand, and then this particular section of the woods was right behind the shooting range.
Mm-hmm.
So
common location.
Pretty common location, but he was in the woods, and this deer stand didn't exist before, like during the stories that I told you. It was a relatively recent addition. And he was sitting up in his deer stand, believe it or not, hunting deer. Yep. And this was daytime. It's a lot easier to hunt deer in the day, they say. I have never gone hunting. I don't know.
You can see him better, I guess.
Yeah, I don't know. I've never had any desire. I never avoided it. I mean, I've done a little bit of pheasant hunting, but that, a bunch of guys go hand in hand basically and walk through a field, and then something jumps up, you shoot it.
Yeah.
It's duck hunt,
Yeah.
Anyway, he was sitting in his deer stand, not a blind, a deer stand. It's basically a ladder that leans against a tree, and at the top of that ladder is a small chair.
Yeah.
To give you an idea. And he's kind of looking, and he sees through the other side of the woods than I would have saw in my last story. Mm-hmm. So he's peeking through the other side. And this particular, through this clearing, you can see what was our rifle range. And I think it went up to 500 yards, I think. So it was clear, but it went up a hill.
Yeah.
So when you're shooting, if you miss, it hits the hill.
Right.
Is the idea. And alongside this rifle range was a post fence, a barbed wire fence, a wooden post, barbed wire, probably about 4 feet tall.
Mm-hmm.
And on the other side of that fence was the neighbor's property, which, depending on the year, was either grazing for cattle. There are twice as many cattle as there are people in Kansas. Nice. Fun fact. Yeah. Or it was crops. And at this point in the timeline, there was nothing there. Just an empty field. Well, my dad's just kind of watching. Obviously, he's looking for movement because he wants to shoot a deer so we can eat it.
Right.
Deer chili. But he does see something kind of walking along the fence, which is kind of what you expect for deer. They sometimes kind of feel a little bit safe walking next to something. And he was like, well, that's not a deer. And whatever it is crawling on all fours. And he's like, dude, in his head, he's thinking, and I wish he was on this to tell the story. Cause I don't want, I can tell my story is fine. I don't want to, I want to make sure I don't miss any details of someone else's story. But
I'm sure he would go way more into detail.
He probably would. And he sees what he thinks is like, oh gosh, is that's like a really big badger? Because we do have badgers there.
Mm-hmm.
And he's like, that is a beefy badger, like swole, right? And it's crawling next to the fence, and he's like, he looks through the scope, and it's far enough away that he's not, it's not like he's, face to face with it when he looks through it, but he can see it a lot better through the scope, and he's like, and the first thing that goes through his head, as he told it to me, was, there must be a circus because this is an escaped chimpanzee. And it's a big one. And he's like, one of the rules in hunting, though, is that you never shoot something that could be a human.
Right.
Because on the off chance that it is, you really don't want to be the guy who shot another hunter, right? So he's like, I don't really, more than anything, he's not like, I want to kill it. He's like, what is this? And this chimpanzee, whatever it is, stands up, upright, 2 legs, and starts a walking. And then I think he said, and I don't know if I'm mixing up the timeline here. I think he said it hiked the leg over this 4-foot fence to step over and start walking into the field. And so chimps don't walk like that.
Right.
And I think he did just get a good look at its face. I can't remember how he described it, though, like word for word.
Right.
But it was essentially what I saw.
Yeah.
And that's why I wish I had like his written testimony or something like that. But anyway, that's what he sees. He jumps down because he's like, well, I need to figure out what this is. Big mistake, buddy. Nothing actually bad happens, but I would never do that. But he jumps down and he kind of just starts walking at a brisk pace through the tall grass there, and the grass gets tall enough in this between where he was and where this thing was, because it's a lower spot. There's water goes through there, so the grass gets really tall. Sometimes even over your head.
Yeah.
The deer really like to nest in that, but that's why he was there. But he gets through this grass, and nothing's there. He looks through his scope down this open field that goes on for a couple miles, and there's nothing there. There's absolutely nothing there, as if nothing ever happened. And he kept that to himself.
Tell anybody.
Well,
assumingly, maybe he told his friends.
Well, no, he didn't tell anybody.
Oh, really?
Because what do you do with that information?
Nothing really.
There's nothing. It doesn't really make any, But in a, to an extent that I don't know why I didn't think about it growing up, and then it just popped into my head.
Yeah.
But I probably wouldn't talk to anybody about it if my older brother didn't confirm that he saw the same thing at the same time that I was seeing it. That kind of changes things.
Yeah.
You can't just write it off as, okay, so we both had a psychotic episode where we both detached from reality in such a same manner that we would hallucinate the exact same thing. And then my dad would 10 years, 15 years later, whenever, I think it was 15 years later, would hallucinate the same thing.
Yeah.
Completely unaware of what we had seen, and I can't explain that other than, okay, well, something was there.
Yeah.
I do not make any claims to know what exactly it was. The signs kind of point towards Sasquatch, Bigfoot, but that doesn't actually give me any more information.
No.
It just says, okay, now I know what I don't know.
Right.
Now
you're like kind of an idea.
It's like, okay, I have a ballpark, but I still have no idea what this is. Because, okay, let's say for sure it was Sasquatch. Well, now I don't know what Sasquatch is.
Right.
So I don't know. And so that's where we are. And I think my dad didn't tell, like, I'm probably a little bit more brave about telling that kind of stuff. My dad said if he ever talked to people about it, he didn't want to use his name either, but he'd be willing to talk about it. Whereas, some of my brothers, they're just kind of like, I don't want to talk about it.
Right.
And it's because, there's a bad stigma attached to this kind of story, these experiences people have. It's like we talked about at the beginning of the show. It's like you're not supposed to, right? Well, what do you do when you see something you're not supposed to see?
Yeah.
And for some people, they would rather, if you tell them that you've had an experience that they would rather not be true, it makes them uncomfortable.
Yeah.
It's a lot easier for them to write you off as crazy than to have to face the reality of the world's not what I thought it was.
Right.
Right. And so that is I think that's why people keep it to themselves, but
it's also like there's not really many people you can talk to easily about it too. Like there's no Bigfoot council where you go to like a group of people and like a little therapy session.
Bigfoot's anonymous.
Like I'm sure there are websites and Reddits, but most of those are full of crazy people, which maybe they're not.
Are they crazy?
Maybe they're not crazy, but sometimes you'll see people who are just kind of feeding into the flame, and I found this foot and I found this hair tuft, or you'll have the guy on YouTube who claims that he was sexually assaulted by a female Bigfoot who made him make love to her. Yeah, it's like there's some levels to it being like a little, I wouldn't even say taboo, but there's definitely a stigma to knowing what this creature is. And in which I would also argue Bigfoot, stepping away from the cryptid, like I would say it's more so just a creature that is commonly roaming around, at least America to an extent.
So that would be the materialistic, naturalistic explanation, is that it's some kind of monkey.
Yeah.
You hear stories though about people shooting them.
Yeah.
And they're I'm going to make a plug to a podcast. If anybody wants to hear, some pretty good, firsthand eyewitness accounts of experiences of people who they've sat on stories sometimes most of their life, and they finally have a place to tell their stories because no one else, they're too afraid to say it anywhere else.
Yeah.
Sasquatch Chronicles is a great podcast. I think Wes Gruber, I think is the host's name. I would recommend that. That would be a great show if you want to hear more about this. But you hear at the end of every show, he asks, well, what do you think it is? And depending on what kind of experience the person has, some people say, it's just an animal. Some people say, I think it's part human.
Yeah.
Some people say, it's not even a corporeal creature. Some people say, this is crazy, right? And this, you said crazy earlier. And at this point in my life, I'm just like, cool, maybe it is true. Some people say that they've killed them. And they go to report, hey, I've killed this. And people in suits show up and say, no, you didn't. It would be in your best interest for you to say that that was not the case. And I'm not saying that they are telling the truth.
Yeah.
I'm just saying that there's a surprising amount of people who have that kind of similar story.
Yeah.
Which only adds to the mystery. If Sasquatch is real, maybe we have caught one. Maybe the government is fully aware of what they are.
Hey, might be careful. The government they're
gonna dox us.
Yeah, they might dox us here. This podcast episode might be canceled because it's too real.
Power's gonna go out. But I don't know. But if they so let's say what would the motivation be for saying no, we can't let people know these are real? I told you earlier today, Teddy Roosevelt, right?
Yeah.
He's the greatest president ever. Okay.
He's your favorite?
He's my top T, capital T Teddy. He is, dude, he had a suicide attempt on him, right? This is not a cryptid story. This is a real story. The man, the myth, the legend.
Mr. T himself.
Mr. T himself. He was going to get up to do a speech, right? This guy shoots him in the chest. Point blank. The bullet gets lodged in his insanely tough pectoral muscle. And everybody's very confused. Because I think, if I remember correctly, he decks the guy or something. I mean, the guy gets shot. The would-be assassin gets subdued. Teddy Roosevelt gets back up, and everybody's really confused about what's going on, because usually when people get shot, they don't get back up.
Right.
And he says, just so everybody knows, I've been shot, but we're going to continue with this speech. And he proceeds to give a 90-minute speech with a bullet wound in his chest.
Legend.
The legend. He believed in Bigfoot. And he was an avid hunter and outdoorsman. He had great relations with Native Americans, who I will also say believed in Sasquatch, Bigfoot. He decided that he made the initiative to start the state park program, which is really interesting.
Yeah, it's very specific.
And I don't know if you have the ability to do this on the podcast, but sometime you should look up, listeners should look up, if we can't. There's a map that shows where the state parks are. There's a map that shows where the most sightings of Bigfoot are.
Right.
And there's a map where all of the United States underground cave systems are. And if you line up all three of them, they all fall in the same place. Oh, there's one more map that you can look at. The inexplicable cases of the missing 411. There are some people who are not only avid outdoors people, but they were the people who trained the U.S. military on how to be, a ranger or whatnot. You have people that if anyone, no, this person doesn't get lost in the woods.
Yeah. And
they just disappear. And you look at there's a guy who, he's written several books where he just goes case by case and highlights all the similarities. That's all he does. It's called The Missing 411. It's an entire book series. He's a retired criminal investigator. And he just goes and he says, isn't it interesting that every single one of these in these particular parts of the world have all of these same things happening? And they're where they're in the state parks. And they're where the cave systems are. And they're where the Bigfoot sightings are.
The place that Mr. T himself protected and
why would he
sanctified
want
under
to
the
do
governmental power. And
I'm just throwing that out there because, I know we want to talk a little bit about, what could Sasquatch be.
Yeah.
That's just kind of some FYI out there. Just okay. Grayson, why do you think? Well, maybe I should back up. Grayson, what do you think Sasquatch is?
It's hard for me to explain it because I went through a pretty major Sasquatch, like a Sasquatch hunting phase.
Mm-hmm.
Like I loved the History Channel TV show. I obviously could tell that they would never find one. Like it was pretty early on where I was like, there's no way this is actual Bigfoot footage or like anything to that extent.
Sure.
Especially like I think the most foolproof evidence that they had was some like audio of something hitting a tree, and I think they found a footprint one time, and that was about it.
Well, one of the things that I always thought about that show is like, okay, so these are usually filmed months in advance. If they actually found like on record like actual evidence for Bigfoot, I don't think they'd wait to publish it.
No, they'd be pretty quick to.
I think it'd be pretty quick.
So I think that kind of stunted what I was thinking or believing about Bigfoot, but it also kind of got me into the idea of like cryptid creatures and the Loch Ness Monster and Bigfoot, aliens, and I think I would love to get into like being a Christian and believing in cryptids and what that foretells. I don't think we have time today to do that, but I will say for me, I'm partial on both ends. Like I think it wouldn't be far-fetched for Bigfoot to be a demonic entity or being or type of demon that is commonly seen around America, the same way as skinwalkers. Like I think skinwalkers are a type of demon, and especially with Native Americans claiming to witness and deal with these different creatures before we even came here and populated here. And despite the tribes of Indians or Native Americans, they like agree on this creature existing. Like there's and they hated each other. They fought each other. They had wars with each other, but they also both agree on the same creature and entity. I think that is proof enough for me to be like, just alone from a Native American account, that this creature is real.
There's something.
Yeah, like there's no way that there's not a entity or being witnessed here. I can't just write that off as not existing and not being real. I think part of me feels like on the other end of like realistic and not necessarily belief, but the realistic side of me wants to say like it is a animal that was native here that was killed off. But I will say, like, for me personally, I feel like that is enough to see that is a creature that could be here. And another thing that I know that you talked about earlier too, like there are no native monkeys to America.
Yeah.
There's no type of
primate. There's no native primates in North America.
Apes of any sort. Like not even little ones, if I'm correct. Like maybe there are some, but there are none recorded that are large, and we're the only country to really possess that, which is interesting because we have such crazy terrain in America.
Mm-hmm.
We have such different terrains and trees and mountains and forests and places that you would expect a primate of some sort to live and move. And
I mean, yeah, there's places for them to exist like very easily
and
right, just like South America, just like Asia. There's they're not there anymore, but there were I think that there were some at one time in Europe, right? And then Australia has primates, the only one that doesn't is us for whatever reason. In North America, South America does.
American archaeologists or different people, they have found like skeletons of people, which they write off as what is it, troglodytes, or like
Neanderthals.
Yeah, like Neanderthals.
Yeah, that's really interesting. I was reading that all of those skeletons are actually starting to classify as humans.
Mm-hmm.
They're kind of moving the goalpost on what is classified as human. What they used to consider like almost human, they're stretching out the definition of human. Like, well, I guess they're actually human all along.
Which I disagree with. Like, I personally feel like that is existence of. I mean, have you ever seen a monkey skull or like an ape skull? It's pretty similar to an American, or not American, but like a human like skull.
Yeah. It's
And I
very
guess
similar.
American skull depends on the
Yeah.
American, but like I feel like those skeletons that are found, which some are used as proof of Bigfoot's existence, and some have been used in that way,
Yeah.
are pretty telling of what could be and what couldn't be.
Yeah.
I think for me the biggest proof that I'd seen and story that I'd heard was like I was watching a YouTube video and it was an audio of a howl of like a sound that was being made. It was like a family that was camping. They had to pull over in the middle of like Colorado, and it was this sound, and this was in the early 2000s, and the video didn't have many views. It wasn't super crazy blowing up on the news or anything, but it was just like this noise and these like family like freaking out, and it freaked me out. Like it felt real, like the audio quality. It didn't feel like it was added on to it. Probably never find that footage now, but
You mean they're not famous now?
they're not famous.
You mean they didn't have a reason to post it like to as a quick buck or claim to fame?
They did not.
Okay.
Which kind of made it a little more, because I've seen some Bigfoot videos where it's like that's not real.
It's
Like,
clickbait.
very very easily like generated with, and I think especially as AI is getting more powerful, we're kind of stepping more and more away from being able to prove existence of cryptids and creatures, and I think that sucks because it's gonna be really easy to duplicate it.
Yeah.
But for me, I think Bigfoot is real mainly for that reason. So, but hopefully in another episode we can go into demons and the Bible and how that works with cryptids. But
Yeah.
I think for today we don't have enough time.
Yeah. We've covered a lot, and I know the stories took up a good chunk of it, but
They're good
I,
stories though.
yeah, for sure. And I mean, that's my story, you know. And I think that, like I've said since the beginning of this, is that I do not know. I have my theories, but I simply don't know. And I have a certain amount of peace with the fact that I can say I just don't know. And I think that's where I get my peace. It's like, well, I don't have to know. I'd like to know, but the things that are important, I do know.
Yeah.
The things that I need to know, I do. And so I really appreciate having the opportunity to talk about this, because really the only thing I can usually just bounce this off of my wife, your sister.
Yeah.
And she's probably tired of
hearing the same
stories,
stories.
because my kids, I've told them the stories because I run out of story times at night sometimes. And so they're like, tell me about when you were little. It's like, I'll tell you. And I tell them, and now one of my daughters, she'll just walk up to kids in the park and they're like, my dad saw Bigfoot. And I'm like, that's not how you start friendships,
Don't start the conversation.
Yeah,
That way.
yeah. But it's fun to talk about, and I think that it is something that you can talk about,
Mhm.
and I would encourage you to, as a Christian, I don't believe in having an open mind, because I don't think that but that doesn't mean you can't hear someone out.
Mhm.
In my opinion, and this, you don't have to believe it. The listener doesn't have to believe it. But where am I coming from? I don't have an open mind, but I do have an open Bible.
Yeah.
And I don't see anything that says I can't talk about this in the scriptures. And I don't see anything that, just because there's not a category for it in the scriptures doesn't mean I can't think about it.
Right.
You know what I mean? So I encourage you to, think about it.
Absolutely. And I think that the main point of this podcast too is, we're going to share things and talk about things that you may not believe, I may not believe, but I believe that you feel this. I believe that you've experienced this, and I can feel the genuine nature of your stories. It doesn't feel like you're just kind of trying to go viral or anything, which I'm telling you right now, judging by my view count, it's not going to happen.
That's the only reason I agreed to do this, because I knew no one was here.
Who knows? Maybe it will. I don't know. I mean, I'm recording this months in advance. Who knows where I'll be in July, but
who knows?
But probably nowhere. But I do really appreciate you coming out here and being able to stick your neck out a little bit for the sake of content creation.
We feed the algorithm.
And again, if you don't believe in Bigfoot, take this with a grain of salt, but also look into the details and try to understand the complexity of it. With that, I'm your host, graysonauth, and this is my guest, Wesley Clark. We'd like to thank you for listening, and I will see you guys next week. Bye. Cool.
Yes, sir. That was fun.
Mm-hmm. Mm-mm.